Hello ladies and gents, welcome to another repair video. Today we're going to be looking at this PlayStation 4 Pro which has been sent in. And this console has been sent in because I believe it's got a damaged power supply connector. I could be wrong, it didn't say anything on the booking sheet, but basically I think that's what the customer initially contacted me for. So basically what's happened with the power supply connector is someone will attempt to clean it out, not realise just how tight the plug is connected into the connector, and when they go to pull it out they'll rip the connector off. So it ends up with the traces being lifted and the traces have to be restored and the connector needs to be resoldered back on. So it's generally a fairly straightforward repair, but if you're not capable of doing it, I do offer repair services. There'll be a link to my website in the video description, so if you want to book in this repair or any other console repair, then by all means get in touch and I'll be happy to try and fix it for you, for a fee of course. Before we do get into the video, I do want to give a little shout out to a couple of people. So the first person is going to be Josh from Micro Mage Repair. Josh is a fantastic technician, he knows his stuff. He's based in the States and he does a lot of work on Nintendo Switches, but he also works on other stuff as well, like he works on other consoles, he works on iPads, iPhones, that sort of stuff. He's a really good technician and he's working really hard to get as much information out there as possible. He's also very active on my Discord community as well, link in the video description, check that out as well. But he's very active on Discord as well, and if he can help you out he will. He's a genuinely nice guy. I highly recommend checking him out. The other person I want to give a shout out to is Wayne from Wayne's Noob Repairs UK. Wayne is a self-proclaimed amateur and he's basically documenting his journeys on YouTube as he goes along and as he learns to fix electronics, not just consoles but everything. He's buying all sorts of stuff and yeah, he's a great guy. I've met him in person. He's an absolutely fantastic guy, really kind, wears his heart on his sleeve, and you know, he really does care about the community. Highly recommend checking him out. He, like I said, he's a self-proclaimed noob, but you know, if you're just learning this sort of stuff yourself, then maybe you can learn along with him and you'll realise that, you know, it's actually not as hard as you think to learn this stuff, and that yes, you can do it. But I highly recommend checking his channel out along with Micro Mage Repair, and there's also some other channels in the video description. I can't mention everyone. I try and give people shout outs and things, but I can't mention everyone in one video. So I highly recommend checking those guys out. But that being said, let's get into the repair. Right we are, so here's the PlayStation 4 Pro. And I'm going to test it anyway, even though I believe I know what's wrong with it. But I'm going to try and at least power it on just before I start. So if we plug this in, basically what's going to happen is if we don't have the 5-volt power connector, it's not going to attempt to turn on at all. So let's just have a look at that. And yeah, it doesn't attempt to turn on at all because there's no 5-volt connection, and the 5-volt connection is required for standby. So basically what that means is that the power supply will provide certain power rails such as the 3.3 and the 5-volt power rails before the console's turned on, and it doesn't provide the 12-volt rail until it receives a signal from the console to activate that line. And the reason for that is for power saving, but it needs some power rails there so as the console can detect when the power button is being pressed. So basically if that rail is missing, then the console doesn't know to turn on because it doesn't know that the power button or the eject button or even the fact that a disc is being inserted. So we've got to restore that to actually get it working again. So I'm going to get this disassembled. While I'm doing this, I am going to fast forward through it because it's pretty boring. But while I am doing this, if you want to support me in any way, then I do have a Patreon link in the video description if you want to support me on Patreon. You can also head over to Twitch and you can link an Amazon Prime account to Twitch and support me absolutely free. And basically what that means is if you link your Amazon account to Twitch, then what you can do is you can subscribe to my channel every month completely free, and it gives me $2.50 every month. It does keep the channel going, it helps me buy stuff like new camera equipment, new audio equipment, things like that. It's a pretty expensive game making these videos, so every bit of support really does help, and I genuinely appreciate it. So like I said, I'll fast forward through the disassembly process for this, because, you know, unscrewing a few screws is rather boring. So I'll fast forward through this and we'll pick it up on the other side. But I am just going to show you what we're going to be dealing with here. There we go. Okay, yeah, so this is a power connector issue. So as you can see here, we've got the ribbon cable. And what people don't realise is that this is pretty short. I mean, if you was to put that back there, then you can see, you know, you don't get much leeway. And some people would either just pull too tightly on it, and some other people will just basically lift the power supply right up like this, and pop goes the weasel. It just yanks it off while it's coming up. So what we've got to do is we've got to basically take this header here, and we've got to resolder this connector on. So this connector comes apart, and you can see that we've got some brown spots here. That's the traces that were there before. So we've basically got to restore those traces using some jumper wire, and then basically just resolder this connector on. Fairly straightforward. It's not the easiest task in the world, but it is a fairly straightforward task to do. So I'll get the rest of this apart, and then we'll pick up the video from there. Right, we are then. So I've got the board out. We are pretty much ready to proceed. So I'm going to pop the housing to one side. I'm going to clean that all out later on. I always do that off camera before I put it back together. But basically for now we just need to work on the board itself. So the first thing I do is just get rid of this thermal paste here. The reason for that is because we're going to be changing it anyway. And I may as well clean it up now because I don't really want to get it all over the bench or all over my hands. So clean it off now, saves us doing it later and stops us making a mess everywhere. Let's just brush down the dust actually because it's quite dusty. Alright, so let's get under the microscope and we'll see what we can do about actually fixing this machine, shall we? Right, we are. So basically what's happened here is, like I said, it's torn a couple of these traces. Well, it's actually torn all 4 traces, but 2 of them are technically still there, but they're not very strong. So we've got 2 here. We've got the main 5-volt line, which is this one here. This one supplies 5 volts to the board. And then we've got the ground point as well. And then basically the ones that are missing are the 2, I believe they're just signal lines. I don't know exactly what they do. I know one on the power supply says AC detect. I don't know what they do. I'm not going to pretend that I know everything because I don't. But basically we're missing these 2 lines here. Like I said, I believe the signal lines. But they are needed in order for the power supply to supply 12 volts to the system. So we're going to have to restore them. And as you can see, there's also a couple of holes here. So this is basically a ground point, but it also acts as an anchor point. So if we take a look at the connector itself, we've got some pieces of metal there, which are basically moulded into the connector. Basically that acts as an anchor point and holds the connector down. It's not very strong, but it is an anchor point nonetheless. So we do need to restore that as well. So what I'm going to do, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just scrape back some of this coating, this conformal coating, and expose the copper that's underneath. And the reason for that is because we can't solder on top of the coating. What I want to do is I want to form a new pad to use as an anchor point. And the same goes for the one on the left hand side as well. So we'll just expose these 2 points just enough so as we can solder to it. Doesn't have to be perfect. So that's those 2 exposed. That's exposed enough. And then we need to do the same for these little points here. So you can see some holes here. These are deliberate holes. These are called vias. And a via is essentially a pathway, and the pathway goes through there to the other side of the board. Sometimes they go to internal layers, but in terms of these, they go to the other side of the board. What we need to do is we need to create a point from here and here down, so as we can make a connection with the connector pins themselves. So we need to run a jumper wire from here to here. And as I said, you can't solder on top of conformal coating, so we've got to scrape these back as well, very carefully. It wouldn't be the end of the world if we did end up with no wire. You could just run it, wrap it around the board, but it's a bit of a pain in the backside to do, so we'll rather use the wire. So we just scrape that back. Same for that one. And then I'm going to clean this up. So I'm just going to brush the dust away. Just get rid of that. And what I'm also going to do is just expose the edge of this here, so as I can create a bridge between this part of the trace on the ground point and the rest of the ground point here. So the reason I'm going to do that is just to strengthen that ground wire and stop it from moving around. And then I'll just use some conformal coating to secure this one here. So I'll just create a point there where I can solder to. And then I'm going to just zoom in here. And then once I'm zoomed in, what I can do now is I can start to tin these new points which I've created. So to do that, I'm going to add some flux. You never want to solder without flux because it's just going to create dry joints and it's not going to solder properly. You're not going to get the solder bonding to the copper properly without proper joints. I'll also add some to these two damaged traces just off to the side here. And one way that we could secure these as well is if we just scrape this back here, so this bit of the trace which isn't damaged and the bit that is damaged, and what we can do is just create a solder bridge between the 2 points, and that's not only going to strengthen the joint, because obviously these have been bent up so the copper is going to be weakened. So it's not only going to strengthen that, but it's also going to strengthen it to a point where it's going to stop it from snapping in the future, if that makes sense. So just expose some of that and just strengthen that a little bit, or rather we will be strengthening that a little bit. Just move a bit of flux over there, that's it. And there we go. So we're ready to go now. My iron temperature is at 450 degrees on a bevel tip. I don't know the size of the bevel tip, unfortunately, but it's a bevel tip, quite a small one, and that's on the Hakko FX951. Just add some solder to there. Tinning basically means just to add solder and just prepping it for soldering. I'm going to do the same for this joint, just there. Just try and strengthen that connection a little bit. Same for the ground point. And if I move down to where these connections actually are, I can do the same here and there. And then if I just push down on this ground wire here, or this ground trace, then I can just bond those 2 points together enough to hold that ground point in place, just like that. Next I'm going to tin these two wires. There we go. And then finally I'm going to tin this other anchor point as well. So all we're doing is just a little bit of prep work ready for when the connector is ready to go back on. So that's all prepped. And what I need to do now is basically just run some jumper wires and get this ready for the connector to go back on. I'm going to take some 0.17mm jumper wire. I've had a few people ask me where I get this from recently. I get this out of old microwaves. There is a video on the channel about that. But you can buy it from eBay. It doesn't have to be this exact diameter. You can get away with using 0.1mm. This stuff here is 0.17mm. So it's a little bit thicker gauge, but the 0.1mm is going to do the job as well. These jumper wires do not carry an excessive amount of current. What I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a little bit of an overhang. So basically I'm going to leave a little bit past the wire, but I'm just going to basically tack that down there. And then if I come back in with my tweezers to hold the jumper wire in place, I can solder it down properly. Or at least I would if the flux wasn't burnt. So if the flux ends up burning, then you're not going to be able to use it. So what I'll do is just melt it there, and then I should be able to reuse it. But if not, then I can just clean it up and have some more flux. But I should be able to reuse what's there now. But if I just add some more solder to my iron now, just a tad. There we go, look at that nice blob there. That's creating a nice secure connection there. And then I'm just going to bring this down so as it's nicely lined up. Just get rid of this burnt bit of flux here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that it's tinned at the bottom. I don't care about it being tinned in the middle, I just want to make sure it's tinned at the bottom. But then I'm just going to trim it off at the end. And then I'm going to move on to the other one. So I'm going to move on to this one next to it for pin number 3. just going to make sure I tin it first. So just off to the side, I'm just tinning this wire. And I did just realise that you couldn't see what I was doing at the bottom of the trace there, so I'll fix that in a second. Just as soon as I do this one, so again leaving a bit of an overhang here. This is already pre-tinned at the bottom, which is fine. So I'll just break that away with a blade and then just give it a little bit of a twist with the tweezers. There we go, that's beautiful. I'm not going to be able to reuse the flux again because I'm going to need to add some solder braid to the ground points, the anchor points. So I'm just going to melt this a little bit just to basically make it a little bit easier for me to clean it. So just heat it up with some hot air and then just take some isopropyl alcohol. And I'm going to take a cotton swab and I'm just going to clean up. Okie dokie. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to secure these jumper wires in place. So I'll leave a little bit of an overhang there because then I can just take this jumper wire and just loop it back around on itself. Not for any other reason apart from giving the conformal coating that I'm about to use somewhere to bond to. So if the conformal coating's got something to bite to, it's going to have a better effect than just putting the conformal coating on top of it, if that makes sense. There we go. I'm just going to position these wires in the right location. I'm going to press down on that so it's flat to the board. And that one there is nice and secure, that ground point. So, like I said, we need to add some conformal coating. The reason for that is just so as it's nice and secure when we go to solder the connector back on. So, all I do for that is I just take some conformal coating. And this is UVH900-LY. You can find that on eBay. And I'm just going to basically paint the area in conformal coating. And it's going to give me a nice layer of protection. But it's not cured. That's the problem. It's not cured. This is UV mask, which means it doesn't cure until it's exposed to UV light. Or more specifically, a light that's emitted on the 405 nanometer wavelength. So I've got a 405 nanometer wavelength laser. And I'm just going to hold it over there like that. And just cure it that way. You can speed up this process using warm air if you really want to. And then after about a minute or so, that should be nice and solid. So let's just check that using some tweezers. Should give it a prod. And yep, that's all nice and solid, as you can see there. And then this wire as well should be fairly solid. It's solid up to there, so I'm not going to worry about that. Same with that one, it's fairly solid. And yeah, that's fine. It's done more than enough. So that's all done. Technically now when we solder this back on, it'll work. But we do still want to anchor it down. So I'm going to take some solder braid. And this is Chemtronics size number 3, which is, I believe, 2.5 millimeters, might be 2 millimeters, I'm not sure. But it's Chemwick number 3 and it's about the perfect diameter for doing this kind of thing. So what I'm going to do is just add some flux on the left and right hand side. And then I'm going to take my soldering iron again. And basically I'm just going to hold the solder braid just here. And then move it over to the left a little bit. And I'm just going to solder this braid onto the motherboard. So I'm going to take some more leaded solder. This leaded solder I'm using for this part isn't Kester. It's a little bit thicker because I need a little bit more. But it's not Kester, it's some cheap eBay stuff. You can use whatever you like for this, but you know, I just don't use my good expensive solder for this kind of a thing. Because it's exactly that, expensive. So once I've filled that up with solder, I'm going to press down on the board, or rather press down on the braid, and I'm just going to move it into position, hold it with tweezers, and just bring my iron away from the board. So I'll let that settle, and then after 3 to 4 seconds, it's had enough time for the solder to solidify, and then I've got to basically trim this away. So I'm just going to use some pressure on the board, not too much, but I'm going to use a bit of pressure on the board and some tweezers and a knife, and I'm just going to do that, and that's basically created a nice new pad. Then I'll need to do the same for the other side. Alright, and there we go. So all that's left to do is prep the connector. So what I mean by that is we've still got the trace wires stuck to the connector, so I need to get them off, and to do that I'm just going to heat them up with the iron and slide them away. There we go. There we go. Alright, so that's that. So now I need to just solder this connector back on. Let's just get rid of those 2 damaged wires there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit this down flat, and I'm just going to tack a couple of these traces on. I do need to add some flux, I just want to hold it in place first. There we go, just like that. Alright, so like I said, I need to add some flux, and then I can solder this down fully. So I want to start off by just anchoring it down so it's nice and flat to the board, because it's going to make my life a little bit easier. So I'm just going to press down on the connector with a pair of tweezers, and I'm going to try and solder this connector to the new anchor points. I will need to add some solder to it, so I'm going to try and transfer heat to the connector and the ground pad at the same time. Just try and flow that solder, and you can see it's created a nice bridge there between the 2 points, which is what I'm going for. There we go. That's one side done, and then I'll go to the same this side. I don't really care if it looks a little bit messy, I just want to get a nice solid point. Make sure it's nice and flat to the board as well, or as flat as I can get it. And then when I give this a wiggle now, as you can see, it's not moving. It's absolutely solid, 100% solid. So that's anchored down, it's not going anywhere. So I'm going to just solder these 4 pins, just like this. I'm going to make sure that it gets a contact between the pin and the jumper wire. Ah, damn it, didn't want to see that. So I've got myself a little bridge here to deal with. So there we go. Alright, so that should be good to go. I'm just going to make sure that we've got a nice contact here on these pins. So yep, you can see that trace is moving with the pin. The ground point shouldn't budge, but I can test that with a meter. Yep, that one's moving with the pin, so the jumper wire with the pin. And yeah, that one's moving with the pin as well, nice and solid. So I'm going to clean this off now for the final time, and we should be done, but I do need to test it with the multimeter. I need to make sure we've got no bridges, and I also need to make sure that every pin is connected properly to the board. Final test is going to be to make sure we've got no shorts using the multimeter. So I'll do that using continuity mode. So continuity mode is going to beep when we complete the circuit. So when we connect 2 points together, it starts to beep. So I'm going to make sure that we've got no short to ground on this input line here. So that's the 5 volt input. or 5 volt output from the power supply rather. We've got no short to ground. Let's just check pin number 2, make sure that is connected to ground, and it is. Let's make sure pin number 3 isn't connected to ground, and pin number 4 isn't connected to ground. That's good. Okay, so we've got no bridges to ground. Make sure that pin number 3 and 4 isn't connected to ground, and it's not, so that's good as well. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into diode mode, and I'm going to test the voltage drop to ground by popping the red probe on ground, and test diode mode on 5 volt line. We're getting a 0.417 volt drop, which is good. Should get a 0 volt drop to ground on this, and we do. 0.985 volt drop to ground on pin 3, and 0.601 volts on pin 4. So all of those are reading fine. Basically, if we got open line on pin 3 or 4, then we know we've got no contact, or pin 1 for that matter, then we know it's not connected to the board. We want to get a reading, but we don't want to get a low reading. So that's absolutely fine. This theoretically should be 100% done. So let's get it reassembled. Right, we are then, ladies and gents. So as you can see, the power supply connector has been fully restored. Bit of isopropyl alcohol there, that won't hurt anything. But that has been fully restored, and now I'm able to successfully connect up this cable, if I ever get it in the right orientation. There we go. And then I can just drop this back in and then plug it in. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to turn this on and hopefully it's going to work. I will connect up a HDMI cable before I turn it on. So I've got the metal shield on, by the way, just to protect the board. It's not going to short out on anything. It's absolutely fine. We're going to test in 3, 2, 1. And there we go. Okay, we've got a disc in there. Give that a few seconds and we should be able to load it up on my capture card. Gran Turismo Sport, very nice. And I've just disabled HDCP. So now I should be able to hook this up. And there we go, so it's working on my capture card now, which is absolutely fantastic. So I'm going to switch that over. And there we go, that is working beautifully. So as you can see there, the system appears to be working absolutely fine. And it's not recognising as 4K, but the reason for that is because it's on a capture card and it never does. So it's working perfectly fine, and it was picking up as 4K on my TV as well, which I'm more than happy to say works fine. The disc appears to be working. Well, I think it is. Let's have a look. Maybe it's just not installed on here. There we go, Gran Turismo. Excellent. Everything seems to be working fine. I'll still need to do a few more tests, but I can do them off camera. Right, so that's going to be it for this video. Let's just summarise on this then. So this was sent in because it had no power. Obviously the no power issue was caused by the damaged power supply connector, which was the result of someone trying to open it up to clean it. It's a very common issue, and if you've done it yourself, you know, don't be ashamed of it. You know, everyone's done it. I've even done it myself. I've damaged them connectors myself in the past, and it's an easy thing to do. But that being said, it is a fixable issue and it's not the end of the world. If you don't feel like you can do that job yourself, I'm more than happy to attempt to do it for you. Obviously, I do that for a fee. So if you want to book it in, head over to my website and you can book it in there. Or you can get in touch if you've got any questions to ask. If you have any comments or questions, you can leave them down in the comment section down below. I'm always happy to hear your thoughts. And if you felt like you've learned something from this video or from any other video on the channel, by all means, you're more than welcome to support me. There'll be a Patreon link in the video description where you can become a Patreon supporter. There'll be a channel membership button if you click on the join button just below the video. That's conveniently placed right next to the subscribe button, so if you're new to the channel, be sure to press that at the same time. So you can become a channel member and you can support me monthly that way, or you can head over to Twitch and link your Amazon Prime account, and by linking your Amazon Prime account then you can become a Twitch Prime subscriber. It's absolutely free, but it does support me. It gives me around about $2.50 every month, and it all does help. So with that being said, that's going to be for this video. If you are new to the channel, like I said, don't forget to subscribe, give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Thank you all for watching, I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye for now.